honor, may I now request Mr. Sanjay Seth, CEO, GRIHA Council, and Professor Christopher Benninger, founder, chairman, and principal architect, CCBA Designs, to join us on the dais, please.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming back after lunch for this plenary session, which is a keynote address by a very well-known architect, Christopher Charles Benninger. Benninger?
Either way you want.
Either way, okay. So I have the liberty to call him Christopher, okay? I'll leave it at that.
That's better.
So I am told that there are a number of people. Normally the plenary halls and an auditorium like Stein is very difficult to fill up. But Christopher, if you look around, you see the number of people that have gathered here only to listen to you. So I think I should shut up as quickly as possible, okay, and then let you go ahead. But before I do that, for the benefit of some of the people who probably do not know you, I need to do an introduction for you. They've given me 2 pages.
Please don't do that.
Completely on you. Now,
please don't do that.
I don't do that?
No.
So I'll read the first para, of course, that's very important. He's an architect, a very distinguished architect, perhaps the only architect that I've come across who had 3 distinct careers within his professional life. Do I need to say more? Ladies and gentlemen, can I hear you? Do I need to say more?
Thank you, Sanjay. It's very kind of you to be here with me. And
it's an honor.
It's an honor for me, yes, and for
it's
all of us.
It's an honor for me, I said. Go ahead.
And also, I've allowed Sanjay to make comments while I'm speaking, to add some humor. No?
Okay.
Now, it is a great honor to be here for the 9th GRIHA Summit. And today I want to talk to you about 3 things. One is green buildings. It's something that we're all very interested in. Another one is in what I would call green cities. Mm-hmm. I'd even like to call them GRIHA cities, no? And then green people, and by green people I don't really just mean people, but I want us to look a little bit at the possibilities of involving villages as maybe GRIHA villages also.
People who envy us, huh? People green with envy, right? So green.
That could be the case, yes. And so these are 3 things I'm going to talk about. Now, when I think we can, do I push something to start this? Yes. Hmm? So let me I push this way, I think.
This one.
I have to point at something.
Yeah, you need to do this.
Okay. Okay, the right one.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, now, green buildings, no? Green cities, green people. These are three things I want to touch on. I think as people in GRIHA and the sustainable building movement, we need to move our strategies out a little to bigger scales, different areas of activity, probably so that we could have more impact and we could be covering more people. Last night we had a wonderful lecture on automatic solar shades between 2 pieces of glass, or inside an office, or outside. And then a lot of the technologies we use would actually only be affordable to less than 1% of the people in this country. So my worry is that the green building movement should not become an elitist movement. That's why I'm going to talk about green buildings a little more. Now, green buildings can be, in my opinion, 3 types. They can be green by nature, they can be scientifically green, or they can be green by numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say green by numbers, sometimes it bothers people in the GRIHA and Leeds movement because they think I'm trying to make fun of them. But, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, I've done one of the most numbered buildings in India, that is the Suzlon One Earth. So I'm not a stranger to green by numbers, and I'm very proud of the green by numbers building I've done. But green by nature, I'm talking about buildings like this. This is the Alliance Française in Amdouar, a model. Now, why I'm showing you the model is because you can see that all the light in this building comes from skylights facing north in Amdouar. There are no windows at all on the south. There are no windows in the east. There are no windows on the west. And the skylights also have ventilators to let the hot air out the top. And they drop light into spaces inside the building. And on the back north wall, they fold down and become windows over the north. And the wet areas, which are always a problem, particularly back in the 70s when I designed this, we plugged them in as small plugins you can see there. So the toilets and the basins were plugged into the wall in the back. And this project also had something I call a public domain. So when we talk about green in our group, we tend to talk about physical things, about recycling water, energy reduction, passive use of energy. But I also think we need to start about talking the aesthetics of green. A building, in my opinion, if it's just a glass box and it's just got low E and it's got some sort of solar shades, but if it's an ugly building with no public domain, no interaction with nature, then it's not a green building. So I think we've got to expand our viewpoint. This building is green by nature. It has no air conditioning. There may be 1 or 2 fans stuck in some of the lower spaces, but there are not even fans here. And it doesn't need electric lighting. This is built back in 1973 to 78. These are the pivoting doors out into that public domain. And as you can see, there are no windows. The light is dropping from the top. And so it's a very simple open space kind of a structure for the Alliance Française, where they used to have their cultural programs and lectures and even teach French. So this is a green building which instantly uses not more than 7 materials. There is concrete, there's brick, there is some old MS window frames, glass, and hardly anything else. Life used to be very simple when we started practicing architecture. These are the plugins in the back, the wet areas, so there's no water, there's no wet areas inside the building. And these are the glass coming down the back. Now, when I designed this, we only had 3 kinds of glass in India. Bad, poor, and even worse. And the bad was a clear glass which had waves in it. This is a kind of a blue glass, and there was another glass that had wire in it so that people couldn't break in easily. Now, this is a building I designed for my favorite client. The name of my client is Christopher Charles Benninger. He's very easy for me to deal with. We do argue at night a lot, but this is the Center for Development Studies Activities. Now, as you can see in this picture, when it was built, it was actually outside of the city of Pune, on top of a plateau, looking into the Western Ghats. And this is a kind of a podium where people can gather, again, a public domain. I think a public domain is a very important part of green buildings. And it's got a Paraji Sagar statue addressing the space. And these are basalt 18-inch stone walls running east and west, so the sun falls on those thick walls. And then the rooms and buildings run north of that with verandas protecting them from the sun. So this is one of the buildings. There's a little amphitheater off of a classroom, all basalt walls, again running east and west, and a lot of landscaping that integrates with the buildings. A lot of public domains, a lot of places for people. Artwork. I think everyone who's designing a building here should spend some percentage of your budget on artwork. My friend Rajiv says that there was actually an ordinance passed once that all buildings in India would spend 3% of their budget on artwork. Well, again, that's by numbers, and numbers don't always work. But I think having a Paraji Sagar statue in the courtyard and having this old Saurashtrian marriage saman, these are sort of important clues to which country we're in, where we are. Okay. And this is one of the verandas. It's shaded by a small roof, and the doors slide open so that the inside space becomes part of the outside space. Again, our offices, there's a bird feeder. So these are green buildings by nature. CDSA electric bills in the hot season run sometimes never more than 5,000 rupees a month. There are no fans in the rooms. The lights are never turned on in the daytime. So you get enough light from these side windows to light up the space. Now, one of the reasons we only have low electricity bills is because the MSEB, Maharashtra State Electricity Board, we often call it Monday to Sunday electricity bund. We actually rarely get electricity on our side. So you could say that that's one way to make buildings green, is that you don't give them any electricity. I often feel the same thing about cars, automobiles. If we want to stop so many cars in the city, see in Pune, we require so much parking. Even a 5,000 square foot plot would have to have 10 parking spaces. My argument is, don't allow parking spaces. Make people suffer. They'll stop buying cars and they'll start taking public transit. But no, we want to have our cake and eat it. So this is green by science, and here I'm going to use a couple of my buildings. first, like the Cochin refineries, where we did sun shading. Last night we were talking about sun shading. This is in the mid-90s. It's a building which has Hunter Douglas louvers completely around the building. So virtually no sunlight comes in. And it cut our air conditioning bills by 30% simply because there's no sun coming in. And there's a space between these louvers and the glass. And those glass are not fixed glass, they're sliding glass windows. So many times in the year, they just slide the windows open. They don't use air conditioning at all. The management wanted air conditioning. I was against it. I think this building could easily survive without any air conditioning. But at one point, they did a calculation, I can't vouch for it, that they saved enough electricity because of these louvers to pay for the whole building in 21 years. So by being a green building, we talk about the economics of green buildings. I think green buildings pay for themselves, and they certainly pay for the health care of the people living and working in them, which is something we should start talking about also. Because this is a fun building to work in. You can actually see through these louvers and see the backwaters, and it's a very pleasant place to work and live. Now, another building, which I'm not going to go into in great detail, is the Samudra Institute of Maritime Studies. This is for a Singapore client who has 60 ships, and he insists that everyone who works on his ships should be an Indian, of any caste, faith, etc., but they should all be Indians. Why? They can all speak the same language together. They know the same street rules. And if the captain is India, he can deal with the guys scrubbing the deck, while if the captain is Norwegian and the guys scrubbing the deck are Chinese or Filipinos, and the chief engineer is an Indian, he said that you get into a huge cultural mess. So everybody gets trained in outside of Pune in this institute. Now this is the workshop. This is a very long, 90-meter long workshop. This wall you're looking at is a photovoltaic wall. It's a 90-meter long wall, and I think it produces 90 kV of electricity. And it also filters the light. So on the inside, it's almost like a stained glass window of a church. You get this lovely bluish, blackish, and we chose two different types of Tata BPL. I think Tata doesn't make these anymore. British Petroleum is very much involved in it. And one of the big clients of my client was British Petroleum ships. He carried a lot of their oil, so he wanted to impress them. So this is the workshop in Lonavala. And incidentally, there are no fans in this building. I don't even think we have any major electric lights. This is their administration building, more photovoltaic cells. Now, what we're really trying to say here is that a lot of our friends, when they do solar energy, they put big fields next to the project, and they need to be, it's like an alien part of the building. So I'm trying to say that actually this is like a Baudrillard painting, that you can use photovoltaics and it can be part of the design, it can be part of the structure. Wind energy, incidentally, is still cheaper than photovoltaics, maybe easier to manage because somebody else does it in a wind energy farm. But that's debatable. This is the inside of this workshop. On the left, oops, it seems I pushed a button without really wanting to. On the left, let's see what happens. We're getting greener and greener. On the left, that's the north wall, which lights up the most of the workshop. And on the right I didn't push a button, it's so automatic. Ramprasad, you're not doing something, no? Okay. Oftentimes my managing director decides I'm talking too slow, and he pushes buttons and I don't know about it. So what was great about that factory is that they don't turn on any lights, they don't have any fans, and they're actually saving the electricity for nighttime use. Now the next one, which I'm just touching briefly on, is the Forge Marshall factory in Pune. On the right, you see the main boiler factory. And you can see at the top there are openings for the hot air to come out. On the south facade, there's this huge jali, which we had some computer software to decide how big to make the holes in the jali to sort of cut the heat and let as much light in as possible. So we were trying to do an optimization between that. And inside the factory, you get a space like this, where again, we don't use any artificial lighting. There are skylights above those trusses. And we get enough light on the south and the north side of the building to light up the factory. And these tubes you see are actually ducts. They're cloth ducts. and there's evaporative cooling at either end of this factory in each of the bays, and the temperature is controlled with that. And we get about 6 to 8 turnovers of air in the building every hour. So it's quite a successful large-scale factory. It's very difficult to convince people in factories to use these kind of things. Now, my favorite building in the science area, much better than the science that I use, is Nimish Patel, Parul Zaveri, and Gautam Patel. Gautam worked in my office in Ahmedabad back in the 70s. We're really going back in history. And Nimish and Parul were studying architecture there when I started the School of Planning. So they're all very close friends. And they did this fantastic project called Torrent, which uses passive downdraft evaporative cooling system. Now, in a climate like Ahmedabad, where it goes up to 45 degrees, in this building, without any air conditioning, they maintain temperatures between 28 and 31 degrees. And in a 24-hour cycle, the temperature year-round never changes more than these 4 degrees. While outside, in one day it may be changing by 17 degrees. It goes down at night when the breezes from the Arabian Sea come in around 8 o'clock. It starts getting cooler, and then it heats up to 45 degrees during the month of April and May. So it has huge climate change. Now, those towers on the outside are actually exhaust. The towers are on the outside, they heat up in the sunlight, and they cause an upward draft, which sucks air in the middle over the corridors and a kind of atrium that goes down into the laboratories and the workspaces. And there are misters up in the top of that inlet. So you get air pulling in, being actually sucked out by these towers on the outside, and that creates a negative on the inside, which sucks air in, and there are misters putting mist into the air. And the amount of mist depends on the season. If it's monsoon, obviously it's much less or nothing. And the cold season, nothing. You're just ventilating. And the beauty is that in the section of this building, you have the air coming from the central blue shaft pretty much at work level. And that's a kind of an innovation also, because this is not air-conditioned cold air. This is comfortable air. And it's something that comes in at the working level. And if you can see the red arrow, the hot air goes out through small windows into the vertical tower. So this is a scientific innovation, and it's been monitored over the years, and I think it's something I wanted to talk about because we can all learn a great deal from Nimish and Parul and Gautam. Unfortunately, Gautam is no longer with us on this world, but this to me is one of the great scientific innovations in sustainable architecture. And what's also nice, I don't want to go back and look at the slides, but you get these kind of attractive architectonic towers that have been done. Now, with my eyesight, I can't read this, but basically what I'm saying is it lowers the temperature from 45 down to 28 to 32. The temperature doesn't change dramatically. Over any given day, you get an airflow inside the rooms. And basically, this is a practically energy-free solution to cooling buildings. And as you know, in many cities like Ahmedabad and Nagpur, Delhi also, cooling buildings is the issue, really. Now, green by numbers is what you and I are all involved in. Again, I can't read that small rating, but these are areas in which you can get points for doing green buildings. And I believe this is very important because most of the people in our country are not Nimish Patels, they're not scientists, are not Christopher Benninger, who will live in a CDSA campus. No? They need to have a guideline. They need to be guided to have a green building. Suzlon One Earth is a company whose business is sustainability. They make wind energy. Now, when I was designing that, I started looking at Indian tradition, and I looked at Fatehpur Sikri, and I said, wow, that's so nice. It's got beautiful water, a public domain. It's aesthetically sustainable. The ground floors open up right into the garden, and it's a low-rise building. I said, I'd like to do all these three things in Suzlon. And then I was working in Cochin earlier, and I came to love deep stumps, where you can burn small candles, votive candles. I like the jallis, the controlled sunlight, yet let air come in. I like the slope roofs. There's an open space, a public domain. Again, I could learn some 4 or 5 things from these temple complexes, which are all over Kerala, all over India, in fact. So my point is we can actually learn architecture by looking at our own culture. We don't need to go to MIT and Harvard and to the AA and to Australia. We can learn right here looking at our own buildings. Now this is a site plan of Suzlon on Earth. What I think I'm trying to say here is all the vehicles are kept in the setback in the outside of the plan. There are ramps down into parking underneath. About 500 automobiles can be parked there. There's also a kitchen for the dining hall, which is on that lower level. And also there's the circular water space is actually located at the lower level. And at the upper level, we have gardens and pedestrian areas. So the idea was to separate automobiles from people, let people have their own domain, have a Brahmastang, have an open space to the sky, and then you get these inside-outside spaces like these classrooms in the learning center where we have verandas to sit under shade, or in the wintertime you can sit out on decks or even in the evening. And then we use louvers to cut the sun and the glare into the spaces. Now, this is a kind of a courtyard. We decided to cover the courtyard with photovoltaic cells. In this campus, we produce about 9% of the energy on campus with smaller windmills, photovoltaics, and then there's a lot of power-saving devices. And if you look closely in this, way down at the end of this picture, there's a plasma screen which is monitoring how much energy is being used per person, per square meter, et cetera, how much water is being used, and we're trying to recycle all the water on site, cut energy use. And in any case, all of the energy here is non-carbon in the sense that it's all produced either 9% on campus or 91% in a wind farm. So we're not importing fossil fuels to do anything in this building. So even though it uses a bit of energy, it's all indigenously produced by this particular organization. So here you can see the louvers, which cut the sun on it, and at nighttime the louvers look like this. You can see through them. So they don't cut views. You can actually see through them. They're slightly at an angle to completely stop any sun hitting the glass walls behind. And also when you stand up, you tend to look down a little bit into these courtyards. So the angle is such that you actually don't notice these louvers. They're not blocking your vision. And of course, we've used water bodies both for aesthetic reasons as well as cooling the air. And these all water bodies lead into a waterfall with a deep stem in the middle. This is a kind of a night view. We like to show that to people who say that you can't see out of the buildings, but you can definitely see out and you can see in. Now, technology. I pushed twice. I hope it doesn't jump out of this. Look way down at the end. You see glass there. That glass is a chimney. It's open at the top and it's open down into the basement. It's something like Nimish's heat towers on the edge of his building. These obviously heat up in the sun. And when these heat up, the air rises and it's actually sucked out at a very high speed, and it gives ventilation to the parking areas below, which is a huge problem in our parking, because when you use subterranean parking, you have huge ventilation problems. Otherwise, people will die of suffocation. So here, we have 3 or 4 entries like this that have these chimneys to pull air out of the bottom. This is the central space. Another picture of the central space. At the lower level, you have a dining hall. 800 people can eat at a time. And then the water comes down this waterfall. And there's a deep stem with LED lights that light up at night. So we tried to bring some tradition into a very modern and corporate building, which is a global company. In fact, the only brief I was given by the chairman of this company was, make it global, but anyone entering here should know you're in India. Mm-hmm. So we used a lot of Indian motifs and deep stems and things of that nature. It's also a very large complex, about 1 million square feet. So we thought the deep stem is something you can always orient yourself. You can look out at any of the lobbies and you can see this deep stem and you know where you are. Now my client actually wanted a skyscraper. They wanted a multi-story building, maybe 22 stories tall, to group everything around an elevator core. But I said, no, let's do a ground scraper instead. Let's do something very attached to nature, to gardens, etc. And this was, of course, you all know, a Terry 5-star GRIHA building. It was also a platinum LEEDs building I think in its size, it was the greenest building at that time. And even the US Green Building Association gave an award to our clients. So that was nice. So these are the chimneys. And my clients always ask me to show that people like you appreciate what they did. And you know, it's not easy to convince a corporate client to put money into a green building. But I'm asking them to do studies. I actually think that they've saved money. They might have even paid for their building over a certain number of years by the energy they've saved and by the health care they've saved on their employees. Now, I want to break away from buildings because you and I, whenever we meet, all of us here, we always talk about buildings now, GRIHA buildings, green buildings. I'd like to talk about GRIHA cities. And I'd like to talk about green people, but I really mean GRIHA villages now. And how can we as a GRIHA movement tie in with things like the Smart Cities movement, covering about 100 cities. And there's a new thing which started about 6 months ago called Livable Indices, Livable Cities, which is attached to the Smart Cities movement. Why don't we work with these things which are happening? Government is already putting money. Government would be happy if we make them more meaningful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I also want to make a point of formal city versus the informal city. I recently wrote a chapter for a book for the University of California urban planning system, where I made a point that a city like Pune is an informal city. 80% of the people live in some form of informal housing. The government of our city looks nice on Facebook and on its webpage, but most of the transactions take place, I'm sorry to say, under the table informally. So even our formal government is actually operating informally, and our economy, about 60% of it is in the informal sector. Even supplying even a Mercedes-Benz made in Pune would have something made in the slums of Pune. So there's this interesting problem we have of two cities in one, and if you look at the city of Pune, you only tend to think of one city. Now, I can't really read this Smart Cities program. You might be able to read it. I think it's too fuzzy for you also. But if I read the 14 projects, they're all GRIHA ideas. They're green buildings, they're sustainable transport, they're sustainable lighting, they have to do with solid waste collection, they have to do with sewage, they have to do almost everything, including sustainable transportation. It could be turned into a GRIHA cities movement kind of a vision paper or document. I feel we should move forward and we should piggyback onto these projects. Sure. Smart Cities is big in India. It's in 100 cities. Now, after doing Smart Cities, I'll give an example. Smart Cities in my city, all Smart Cities have pilot areas. The pilot area in Pune is Aund, Baner, and Balivari. Now, these could be three of the richest per capita income-wise wards in our city. We're not covering any slums. We're not covering urban villages. We're not covering workers' habitat. We have thousands of workers from North India building buildings in Pune. So we're not covering really about 70, 60% of the population who lives in informal sector, unhygienic, poor sustainability projects. That's something we have to think about. So I do want to talk a little bit about the informal and the formal city, but look at the list of the 14 projects in Pune, and you'll see practically they don't know it, but they've been influenced by a lot of our ideas. Now, the livability indexes, again, I can't read this from here, but there are some institutional factors, there are some social factors, economic factors, and physical. Now, physical scared me because I thought it would be flyovers and expressways, but actually, if you see the physical ones, they're mainly things like sewage, taps for slum dwellers, things which really could be construed as GRIHA kind of ideas. No? So we need to look at this livability indexes. Every smart city will have a livability index. And then how will you get the livability index? There are 77 factors on which you'll do ratings. For example, one of them would be water supply. Now, if every house in your city has water in the house, you get 100%, and that's one of those 77 points. Now, But each point is divided into two parts. It's divided into the core and the support. The core, you get 70% of a point, and the support, you get 30. So supposing you miraculously have water supply to every house in your city, you get 100 points there, but you only have metering in half of them. So in the 70%, you get 70, and in the 30% of supporting, you only get 35%, or 15%, sorry. So it's an interesting index. I think it's well thought out. And what happens is every city would be rated by these 77 indexes and then ranked. Now, why I like this, the Smart City program alone, our commissioner became a poster boy because he was the first smart city in India. At least we in Pune believe that. And the Prime Minister came and inaugurated it and said it was the first smart city. I'm sure there were other first smart cities, but I'm saying we were told we were the first smart city. And our commissioner got a lot of credit. But the point is, my commissioner will be leaving Pune. He won't be there to see whether all this happens or not. And I told him that, well, you've chosen a pilot area, which is messy, and there's very poor, there's no sewage in many parts of it, there's very poor solid waste collection. But the objective is in 10 years to bring the level of the pilot area up to the level of, I think it's Melbourne, Australia, Portland, Oregon, which are very smart and cities according to the smart cities movement. But I said, do you know that the personal purchasing power of the people living in these 3 wards, I'm going to guess that it's higher than the people, middle-class people living in these 2 pilot or benchmark cities. We're actually richer than they are. We have more purchasing power. So you're telling us that we would be coming up to their level in 10 years when in fact the people living in these 3 wards actually earn more money than they do. The infrastructure is poor, the facilities are poor, the services are poor, but why are we doing this? For rich people. Why aren't we working in the slums of Pune? If smart cities want to make an impact on the people of India, they should work in slums, urbanized villages, illegal layouts, labor camps, these kind of places. So I think to be effective, we have to reach the people of India, and we have to make them participatory. Now, oops, I don't know how this went so fast, but this is something, it's going on its own. Fantastic. Let me push it back again. Maybe it doesn't want me to show this. No? This is actually something I'm going to cheat. I'll go back twice and see whether it goes forward. Okay, what I'm going to show you is something that works on smartphones. I'm not going to call it an app. It's actually a software platform on which you can participate in mapping your city's stresses. Now, if you look quickly, you can see before it jumps away, there's a smartphone there. And what happens is there's an app on that smartphone, and when you push that app, it opens up to, I think it's called 9th GRIHA. It's a platform. Now, on that platform, it's with Google Locator. Wherever you are, it's located. Now, there's something magic here. That makes it more fun for you. But let me give you an idea. You open your cell phone. You can find icons for different stresses in the city. And then you can push an icon, like supposing sewage. I'm sorry, this is really jumping around.
No, just one second.
Oh, wait a minute. I think it's gone way beyond. Automatically, it's going forward, I think. So I have to talk faster. Okay, the idea is you can push sewage overflowing on the street, one of those icons. Now, it will send a message to your local corporator. It will send a message to the person in charge of sewage in the municipal corporation, the official. It will put a dot on the map that says there's sewage overflowing here. There'll be 3 kinds of maps. I hope I can remember this properly. One is a map of the city, showing all the stresses. It could show solid waste on the street lights not working, sewage overflowing, potholes in the road. There are more than 20 variables on this right now. Or you could look at a map of your neighborhood. So it's something where a 10th standard kid can look at his own neighborhood and he can say, look, there's sewage coming out in these places. There's solid waste on the road in these places. There's street lights not working here. There's no water supply in this pocket. There's no sewage in this pocket. They're using septic tanks. So he gets a map of his neighborhood. Or the third map, supposing you want a map of Pune that just shows sewage overflowing. So one map of Pune shows all the stresses, and you can see the high stress areas. Another map would show only sewage, or only solid waste problems, or only street lights not existing perhaps. are not working. So this is a citizen participatory apparatus. It's also empirical. It's based on what's actually happening. It also involves all the stakeholders. It involves people. It involves elected officials. It involves the administration who's in charge of sewage, in charge of streetlights, in charge of whatnot. And it's got a system of reporting. So you report sewage overflowing, and it's reported to the concerned official and to your local corporator. And then you can get a report later because there's a little click. It's like your WhatsApp. When the official answers this and says that he's seen it, you get a click, and then you can go back and get a report. Now, I'm sorry to say that this was actually invented by a person who shares the same name I have. My name, Benninger, as you know, is a very typically Indian name, and I think there are only 2 of us in India who have the name Benninger, maybe 3, and one of them is my son, Siddharth. And at CDSA, the Center for Development Study, he's evolved this program, and he's working closely with people like Jagan Shah and other people here in Delhi, and he's developed this with funding from the United Nations. We have 60% of the kids in secondary schools in Pune have smartphones, 60%. So he's training teachers to train these kids how to use that. And this is going to be a major thing in Pune with kids actually mapping stresses in their own cities. So from kids, it will go to adults, but we would train the secondary school children, particularly in public schools as well as private, and get people involved in their city. And I think it's a wonderful idea. Now, livability I talked about, and I say we have a first city and a second city. And if livability really is going to be effective, it would measure the entire city. It would measure the taps to everyone in the city, whether they live in a chawl, an urban village, in a slum, in workers' housing. It would look at everybody. Now, someplace in here I put a map. But why I put this picture, you talk to many people about Pune in Maharashtra. They say, oh, yes, it's a historic city. That's Pune. Pune is the city of the Peshwas. It's the city of the Marathas. It's a city that ruled the whole of India. It was actually not the British. It was the Marathas who had a concept of India and ruled right from Tamil Nadu up to Kashmir and up to Afghanistan. So people in Maharashtra, they say, this is Pune, historic city. Then there's a lot of other people all over India who say, no, it's not a historic city. This is an IT city. This is where Jaguars are made, Land Rovers, Mercedes-Benz, VWs. It's the center of IT in many ways. Tata Consultancy Services here. Narayan Modi started his career here. Systems Research Institute is here. It's a city of young people, smart people, and it's also a city of animation. 80% of films made by Disney World, the animation is done in Pune. Many people don't know that. So it's an upper middle class, high-tech, freewheeling city with high streets. This is not a shopping mall, it's a high street. In Baliwadi, maybe 3 minutes walk from my house. So this is what people think Pune is. But I say, no, this is not Pune. This is hardly a small percentage of the people in Pune. This is Pune. People live in chawls, they live in slums, they live in villages which have been highly densified and are not covered by many development control rules. This is Pune. This is where 75% of the people live. Now, I drew this map for a book at the University of California to show what? The center of the city, any housing built there, the EMIs, the equated monthly installments, are so high, only 3% of the metropolitan area population of 10 million people could ever afford to buy an apartment in that central circle. The same thing is true with Bombay. South of the airport, 3%. North of the airport up to Thane, another 6%. My second circle, only 6% of the people can afford that. So in the whole metropolitan area, if I take these 2 circles, only 9% of the people could even think of living in a new accommodation close to the city. Of course, there are many people in slums. There are urbanized villages. There are workers' quarters also overlapping this. And in that outer circle, another 17%. In Bombay, another 17 people can live up to Karjat, Ulhasnagar, those areas, 2 hours train ride from the city. So we live in a society in which people are excluded from buying any kind of shelter. I would say roughly 75% of the people cannot afford any kind of housing being offered in the market today. Now, there are many of my friends like Ashok Lal, who's trying to attack this by designing very low-income small units now. So this is one of the approaches. I think we should look at those approaches. But this is the income distribution in Pune. Again, I don't have my glasses, but I want to say that 5% of the population, they're probably migrants from Vidarbha or other states, but they live at subsistency. That is, that they spend 85% of whatever income they have on food and the fuel to cook it. They may live under flyover infrastructure. They may live under railway carriages, whatnot. They live on the street, basically. And then another large percent of people are in what is called the urban poor. And if you read Ranjit Sabik's recent articles about Delhi, it's a very similar situation. If you look at the large slums around Delhi, the workers' quarters, the urbanized villages, a very large percentage of our cities are actually poor and unsustainable. And then you get a large lower middle class. And then you get, a fairly substantial group of wealthy people, upper middle class and middle class. Now, all of you know that if you read Time magazine, it says India has 30% of its people are in the middle class. That is a patent falsehood. 30% of Chinese people are in the middle class. Only 3% of Indians are in the middle class. And it went from 1% to 3% in the last 15 years. There's a myth that we've created a huge middle class, and it's a myth because what we see is what we believe. You travel through Pune, what you see is fantastic automobiles on the few roads we have. So whatever automobiles we have, they get crowded into very tight spaces. No? But I would say yes, in Delhi and in Pune, 30% of the population are middle class. I would say even a lot of them are upper middle class. But that's not India. That's not the villages of India, the small towns, etc. So what I'm trying to say is that we live in a world where when we do 9th GRIHA buildings, our clients are in that wealthy group, upper middle class group. And that's the group that we're catering to. Why don't we have a strategy to get out of that and have GRIHA cities, have GRIHA villages, no? So this is those bottom three groups, subsistency, poor, lower middle class. These are based on actual surveys of people done by Center for Development Studies and Activities in Pune, and we even did this in other cities, no? So if you look at the really poor people in cities, you can see how much they spend on food, how much they spend on clothing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see that people in India have different consumption patterns than we people sitting in this audience have. They live in a different world than we live in. They live in different shelter systems than we live. They use different transport. And we simply are out of touch with reality in India. And I say I put poor people, but they're not poor people. These are typical Indian citizens of cities. No? So I think we should be aware of that. We have systems in India like slum upgradation. I mentioned many of the good things which are happening in many cities and many slums, making them more sustainable. Now, this is one of my hobby horses. In India, we used to say there's no land for housing. That's why the low-income groups can't be housed, because land is too expensive. But suddenly, we decided we need to industrialize quickly about 10, 12 years ago, so we were able to have special economic zones. Suddenly, a lot of land became available to people like Mr. Ambani, Mr. Mahindra. My clients have, Suzlon people have 3 SEZs now. Suddenly, we could have all this land. So I'm saying good, and we can learn from that. I'm not against that. I'm very much in favor of having manufacturing zones, just like the Chinese and the Thais and everybody else does. But can we have special habitat zones? Can we have integrated projects instead of 2,000 hectares of lands for Ambanis with only factories and maybe some railway lines? No? Can we put low-cost housing in SEZs and make them special habitat zones? Can those special habitat zones have primary schools, basic health facilities? Can they have technical training to prepare people to work in industry? This country has to expand manufacturing and has to create jobs in factories. You wouldn't realize, though, manufacturing has increased in gross numbers over the last 20 years, but as a percentage of the economy, agriculture has gone way down and services have gone way up. We've increased the service sector, but manufacturing has grown along with the growth of the economy, but it's percentage-wise of the gross national product, it's the same as it was 20 years ago. So these special habitat zones, the special economic areas can work together. Now, this is a project I did way back in 1972. I did it for HUDCO. It shows how old I am. I think I was 29 when I did this project. And the reason I'm going to tell you the truth and confess, how did I get this project? I came to India in 1968 as a Fulbright student, and I wanted to do low-cost housing, and very frankly, nobody was interested in low-cost housing, except one person, Kirti Shah. Kirti Shah is a thought leader. So I said I want to do low-cost housing. So everybody said nobody's interested, but somebody said, no, there's a social worker in Baroda called Sinit Bhai Mehta, who's a labor leader of ONGC and IFCO and all these factories coming up around Baroda. Go meet him. So he said, yes, I want to do low-cost housing. My wife has a school in the slum. Can you do something for the slum? So I did a scheme, but of course the land didn't belong to the slum dwellers. It belonged to the municipal corporation of the then Baroda, so we couldn't get anywhere. So I went back to America. I had a teaching job at Harvard and was happily teaching at Harvard until late 1971. And I was asked by the Ahmedabad Education Society to come and start the School of Planning. And I got there and I wrote back to Senate Bank saying, come on, let's do some housing. And he said, you know, it's trouble, we don't have any land. Then there was a war. India won the war. Mrs. Gandhi was fantastically popular. Sinit Bhai Mehta had a small political party called Praja Socialist Party. He merged with the Congress. He became, guess what? The Minister of Housing. That's what's called good luck. You do free work for a social worker. 4 years later, he becomes Minister of Housing. At the same time, HUDCO was formed at the same time, almost the same month. So he asked me, okay, Benninger, you're the only person who offered to do free work for me. Now I'm going to pay you a fee. Do low-cost housing in Jamnagar. So we built this project, which had 4 roads around it. It had shops with housing above for small shopkeepers. It had a common space, and everybody got a small house of about 200 square feet with a courtyard. This is the cluster plan. So they got a small one-room house with a 100-square-foot courtyard, and they got the roof, a stair up to the roof, because in Gujarat, people like to sleep in the roof. So this is a tiny house, but it's very similar to some of the housing now again. People are calling affordable housing. And at that time, we didn't have to give automobile parking and fire access, so we could do a very high-density kind of urban cluster, much like Old Delhi, or some of the older cities share a lot of walls, and we could come up with a scheme like that. Now, because the World Bank, this is called good luck. First, you meet a social worker, you do free work, he's supposed to become Minister of Housing, he gives you a project, and then the World Bank says, who in India is doing low-cost housing? And somebody says, Benninger is doing it in Jamnagar. They come and look at the scheme, they say, can you come and do work in Madras? At that time, Chennai was called Madras now. So I said, sure enough. There I went and we did surveys of the slum dwellers. Nobody could afford a house at all. So we said, then we need no-cost housing. So no-cost housing became a project called Sites and Services, 1973. We simply sold plots, 300, 400, 500 square feet. We gave bicycle paths, storm drainage, electric lights every 100 feet. We gave common WCs, common wash places, and the possibility of having a tap in your house later if you want to pay for it, having sewage in your house if you want to put a WC. So it was a growing house plot. People picked up their grass huts, moved them over here. But unlike a grass hut where they didn't own the land and it may be torn down anytime, they owned this, so they started collecting scrap material. They started building their own paka houses. And we built, in the 1970s, 15,000 houses in Chennai. So that was a massive project of low-cost housing. So this is affordable. In a way, I think it's an example of sustainability because you're moving people out of fire-prone grass huts into environments which can become very sustainable. They can have potable water, they can have sewage, they can have community spaces, etc. So this is just an isometric view of what this could look like. And I'll just move as faster because Sanjay is telling me that I have 5 minutes left. And he wrote a note that I'll cut your head off if you don't finish in time. So, quickly, this is in the third project. It's in Hyderabad, where we sold one-room houses to who? With a bath and WC and Nani to class 4 workers. But we sold very big plots. We sold about 1,000 square foot plot. And the idea was that on 1,000 square foot you live, and then you can build more rooms and rent them to your friends, your village wallas, your relative. So these class 4 workers became urban managers. Instead of the government building low-cost housing and renting them to poor people, these individuals became the managers of low-cost housing. It's a very successful scheme. That was in the late 70s. Now, this is something we did. I'm not going to dwell on it, but it's called the Principles of Intelligent Urbanism. It's almost a charter for sustainability. We came up with this when we were doing the capital plan of Bhutan, Thimphu, and I'll just rush quickly through this now. This is, for example, balance with nature. We looked at the soil, the aquifer systems, the biomass, then the infrastructure on top, and we tried to look at the relationship between these different levels. So cities can become GRIHA cities. Bhutan structure plan is an example. I'll try to do it very quickly. That's the capital complex where we built the Supreme Court and the National Ceremonial Plaza. This is a very valley town. We wanted to protect the slopes, protect the river. So we went through a lot of studies. I can't read all of these without my glasses, but we looked at the open space, we looked at the slopes, we looked at environmentally fragile areas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We came up with precincts with development control rules based on the fragility of the ecosystems in each of these precincts, and tried to come up with a plan which also had all the heritage sites marked on it, which had all of the bio-sensitive areas. And we came up with a plan which I think could be called a GRIHA plan for a city. So I think we here could think of GRIHA plans. Now the last thing I'll do, I have 2 minutes left. We have in this country a fantastic program being run by this government. It's called the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Act. I can't pronounce that as one word, but it's an employment guarantee scheme. So my simple question is, if all these crores and crores of people, and I'm telling you there are crores of people working in this scheme, if crores of people are working in all the states in the scheme, in rural areas, and here's something, the black line is the number of poor people in each state, and the other line is the number of people covered in the Guaranteed Act. Now, and these people are paid digitally through banks, and if you look, there's even, I have data on what percentage of the people under the scheme have bank accounts and which ones are digitally paid. But my viewpoint is these people could be involved in, I'll give an example, something called watershed management. Micro watersheds, watersheds around their village now, where they can do things like nala bunding, they can do things like contour bunding, they can build percolation tanks. Under a percolation tank, they can have micro irrigation systems lifting the water out. And we've done projects in Maharashtra under something called Pani Panchayat, where we try to get the village to equitably share water between each other and to develop this ecosystem. Let's call it a GRIHA village, no? Where they don't have to move to the city. They can produce enough food and sustainability to stay in their village. So my plea is, let's move GRIHA into smart cities, livability cities. Let's move GRIHA and talk to the government about the employment guarantee scheme and how we can have plans for that. We people can make plans based on our experience in green buildings. We can make plans for these things. So I think I'll just call it to an end there. That's the end of my talk. My head didn't get cut off by Sanjay, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Christopher Benninger for you. And surely we'll be looking at the smart city rating program. And the common factor between you and the GRIHA is that we are all, both of us are involved in the Amravati Capital Township. And we hope that that township could be used to develop a rating program for the smart city.
Wonderful, yeah.
Yeah. So I had a two-pager, as I told you. I also did some underlining where I probably thought that at the end of the talk I would introduce him, to leave the personality that he is. But probably what I will do is put it up on the website of GRIHA for all of you to download and read it. It's really, really interesting, and it's something which we should all try and follow him and practice what you have done?
No, I think none of us should practice what other people do. We're all struggling.
Okay.
We're all making mistakes. No? We should work together and try to do things better.
Mistakes?
No, we should all search together.
Okay.
For a better future.
Thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.